Men and women in white and blue scrubs hurried past. From where she stood, frozen, Imogene could perceive the smell of disinfectant. At that moment, she felt a tap on her shoulder and looked up to see her family doctor staring at her with puzzlement in his eyes.
Are you okay? I know this is a lot to take in. If you would rather we find another donor, that's...
No.
The teenager's eyes blazed with determination.
He's my father. I want to do this for him.
The doctor, a man with graying hair that made him look like he was in his 60s when really he was 45. Their last family doctor had been his father, and when the old man died, his son took over.
This way to my office, please.
The teenager nodded energetically as she chewed on the side of her lips. That occurrence weeks ago detoured the course of a teenager's life. For 17 years, she lived as Imogene Blanchette, daughter of Calvin Blanchette, the richest man in Dax County, and Rachel Blanchette. And during that time, she lived a life of ease, having all the best resources at her fingers, not to talk of the love and affection her parents showered her with. Her father was a little more absent than her mother, but he made up for it in many ways. And so Imogene was happy. Life was good for her. She had nothing to worry about. That was until that day at the hospital when the doctor informed her,
I'm sorry, but you can't donate blood to your father.
In surprise, Imogene tilted her head to the side to look at her mother, who wore a similar expression. But the doctor wasn't done. After clearing his throat, he continued,
Mrs. Blanchette?
He faced her directly, and Imogene could see something like uncertainty in his eyes.
Can I speak to you privately?
Absolutely not.
Rachel Blanchette threw her purse down on the table. Just a few minutes ago, she'd arrived back in the country from a conference. Her other hand grabbed Imogene's and squeezed it softly.
Whatever you need to say can be said in my daughter's presence. You're fairly new here, so you might not know this, but she's a medical genius.
Dr. Sam's face still bore signs of discomfort, making Imogene wonder what the problem was. It could be something she wouldn't be able to handle, she thought. If anything, she could always hear it from her mom later. Placing a hand over her mother's hand, Imogene smiled.
It's fine, Mom. I'll step out and give you some privacy.
Rachel winked, which Imogene knew to mean that she would debrief her later on whatever the doctor had to say. Except that didn't happen. The clock had read 3 minutes to 11 a.m.
Mom?
Imogene got up into a stretch. Having been sitting in that same position for a little over 3 hours, her back was screaming for mercy. Rachel Blanchette stopped, but she didn't look back.
I have to leave for a meeting now. As for your Faye, as for Calvin, don't worry about him. The doctor is working to find another donor.
It didn't skip Imogene's attention that her mother's tone was cold, something she'd never experienced before. Deciding to push it aside until they got home, Imogene settled on asking something else.
What did the doctor say?
Nothing for you to worry about.
With no idea of what that meant, Imogene wrote her mother's mood off as worry for her father. Why trouble her for answers when she was going through a stressful situation? She thought to herself. It would only be weeks later before she learned the truth of what happened.
Jeannie?
Imogene pulled her headphones off her head as Sally came in. Sally was the head of staff in the Blanchette household. Yes, her family was that kind of family.
Mom?
Mr. Blanchette is home, Jeannie.
Sally's eyes were soft as she broke the news. Immediately, Imogene swung her legs off the wall, shuffled on slippers before running out of her room.
Be careful not to fall.
Sally's warning sounded from behind her, but Imogene paid it no attention. After the day at the hospital, she hadn't seen either her father or mother, and had for some reason been forbidden from leaving the house. Heck, she'd been forbidden from going to school and had been taking lessons from home.
Dad?
Imogene was more than halfway down the stairs when her dad came in through the door. 10 more steps felt like such a long time, but she finally fell into his open arms, staying in the hug and breathing in his scent. Along with his regular scent, there was also the smell of disinfectant. He'd come straight from the hospital.
Dad?
It was only when she leaned back that she was able to study his face. The bags beneath his eyes, as well as his scruffy neck, told a story of unrest.
You don't look too well, Dad.
Calvin Blanchette could feel a headache coming on as he stared at his daughter. His beautiful princess. There was no easy way to do this, but he couldn't keep it from her forever.
Imogen, let's go sit. Dad is feeling a little tired.
The teenager nodded energetically as she chewed on the side of her lips.
Let's go.
The words were still leaving her mouth when someone came in through the door. Rachel Blanchette.
Mom.
Imogene's face lit up, but her excitement was short-lived when instead of stopping, her mother walked past her and up the stairs. Imogene froze for a moment before looking back at her dad.
Did something happen to Mom?
Calvin shook his head.
Imogen.
He began, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulders, which felt stiff, before leading her to the sofa. This room, with its quietness, was a place they gathered as a family to spend time together. It was heartbreaking that the news he was about to deliver wasn't a good thing.
Imogen.
Dad?
She frowned and went back to worrying her lips.
Imogen.
Dad, you're scaring me.
Imogene's voice went high-pitched, and Calvin heard the fear. Taking her hand, he noticed that her nails had been painted a baby pink color. If this were a regular situation, he would have teased her about it. But it was not. Far from it.
Imogen, the doctor.
Are you dying?
Before he could get his complete sentence out, Imogene interrupted.
Did he discover signs of cancer in your body?
Again, on a normal, regular day, Calvin would have at least chuckled. But this wasn't the time or place.
Imogen.
He held on to her hand, tighter.
You're not our biological daughter.
Except for the sounds of their breathing, the room went silent, even as Calvin felt Imogene go stiff.
Your mother.
He coughed, clearing his throat.
Rachel insisted we out a missing persons report to find our real
Imogene pulled her hand out of his.
daughter. Apparently,
Has the clock always been that loud? Imogene wasn't sure, but it was the only thing she heard at that moment. Not biological daughter. Missing persons report. This is the reason. Like a bell going off to signify the change in hour, Imogene realized this was the missing piece of the puzzle she'd been trying to complete. It finally clicked. The reason her mother... No, not her mother. She wasn't theirs and they weren't hers.
assured, we're trying to find your family.
Her family. Imogene questioned internally. Who were they? All the years she'd lived as Imogene Blanchette. That had been a lie. Who was she?
Who am I?